Good afternoon, or whatever time of the day you're watching this at. Student Commander here with one of our first talks on war talks. I'm here with my friend David Shermer, and Student Commander is the developer of the Civil War Commander game series, our first game, Spanish Civil War Commander. And today we're going to talk, I hope you talk too,
I'll try.
about why do people like war? Now, personally, since I was a kid, I never liked bloodshed. I do now. No, I'm just kidding. I don't like bloodshed. I don't like violence, but I've always enjoyed strategy and the conduct of war and all the little bits and pieces that comes with it, logistics. And that doesn't make me a violent person, I think. What do you think?
I think the reason why many people like war is the same reason that they like action movies. It's something exciting to read or to watch on the news. It goes to a baser instinct. Action movies tend to be the best movies.
Action movies tend to be the best movies. And the
Or
antagonist,
the biggest money makers.
yeah, like in the antagonist, the bad guy. So we say war is the bad part of society. And without war, it seems that things don't really happen in terms of history. There's two ways I think of reading history. I'm a huge history buff, and the two easy ways to read history are studying biographies of famous people, such as presidents or dictators or what have you. That's one way because it'll talk about all the topics around that person, and you learn a lot of history. And the other way is wars. One war will link to the other war, to the next one, and to the next one, like World War I. World War II is the continuation of World War I. The Spanish Civil War is the preparation in so many aspects for World War II, or the training ground, as some people say. So war becomes an exciting way to learn things. And in a movie, like David was just saying, the bad guy, without the bad guy, the movie becomes really boring. Think of all the James Bond movies. All right, we already know who Bond is, but without Blofeld or the other guys, we don't really have a story. So that's the role that war has.
Well, it's more there's always a good guy and a bad guy. So your side is the good guy, the other side is the bad guy, and it's somewhat, it's the typical storybook, but it also goes back to a basic, a baser instinct. You think about 3 and 4 year olds. If one 3 year old wants something that another 3 year old has, they're going to go over and physically take it from them or hit them to take it from them. That's a base instinct. And with war, it's typically countries acting like 3 year olds. This is what I want. I'm going to go take it. Or on the flip side, somebody comes over to take your stuff, I'm going to hit you. And whoever's the bigger player tends to win.
So that's a good point. It's very basic, and the simplicity of it attracts us. It's something that anybody can understand, including a child. It's conflict, and we were talking about this the other day.
Well, war is it's the ultimate political action. You have negotiations and you do whatever you can to argue your point, but when you get to a point where the other side doesn't agree and the ideas are mutually exclusive, I have oil, you don't, you want the oil, I won't give it to you, you're going to come and take it because you need it for whatever purposes, for your economy to do well, for your military to do well. But the whole reason why we have militaries is, not just to keep us safe, but to keep our way of life.
Yeah, through diplomacy, it takes forever. The war speeds everything up, so it's a catalyst for change. Yeah, that's a good.
Well, diplomacy works if you get your way.
Exactly.
But typically, if you don't have a big military behind you, diplomacy tends not to work.
Yeah, so the Japanese needed oil and resources, oil and natural resources, and so in the 1930s they invaded. 1931 they invaded Manchuria. 1937 they invaded China, and it was, we have a lot of population. Japan did. It gives us the right to. We have to feed them. Surely we're the victims. China is not exploiting the resources. They're not tapping into the resources that they have. It gives us the right to just go in there and take it. And back then, there was the League of Nations, but there was no UN, and there was no, arguably, I mean, the UN can't really do much anyway.
It's because they don't have an army behind them,
Yeah, they got the blue helmets.
which again doesn't do anything. Again, diplomacy doesn't work if you don't have the military behind you. Same thing with 3-year-olds arguing. Nobody takes the candy from the big 3-year-old.
I remember that in school. Like, I felt so bad that I was bullied here and there, but nothing to write home about. But I remember the big kid had some advantage, or he was able to insult me or other kids, and I couldn't do anything about it. Of course, I wasn't brave enough, but just for the sheer, that's it. It's a fait accompli. He is the strongest kid, or the toughest one, and there's nothing I can do about that. It's pretty unfair. So Japan takes the resources from the Pacific, and when the U.S. tries to stop it diplomatically by doing an oil embargo, they'll say, well, we'll just bomb the heck out of you, and we have 6 months to try to win this war. So there's a lot of stuff. Let's go to the American Civil War, for example. Abraham Lincoln, that was not his purpose, but he was able to change with the times and become, he was sort of a moderate Republican. It was the new Republican Party, of course, but he was not an extremist. But he became more, I wouldn't say extremist, but he became more focused on, what's the word, David? He more dedicated on the cause for abolition and
The South and basically the slave owners could not accept, they went on their "not my president" type of stance that, Lincoln was, they couldn't take Lincoln as a president, and
yeah, obviously
they decided, they seceded from the Union. They're like, okay, well, he's not my, we're not going to accept him as a president, the familiar refrain of "not my president," and they left the Union. And when they did that, they thought it would just be a peaceful, well, we'll leave, we'll leave. The North won't do anything. Lincoln's not going to do anything.
Yeah, he was an unknown quantity to an extent, and he didn't really have a strong political history, and so he was certainly he was a politician, but he was not.
Oh, he was a politician through and through. I mean,
Yeah.
he just had continually failed, and so he was.
They gambled. The Confederacy gambled that would not escalate, and it did.
Well, they didn't think that neither side really expected it, because, again, it's like, well, we're all Americans. We're all Americans. The other people, those people are, Americans and whatnot. And, the Fort Sumter, I mean, you had the people in the South, in South Carolina, in Charleston, went and to the shoreline to watch the bombardment of Fort Sumter.
Did they serve ice cream?
They were, I don't know.
Something.
But they were there in their Sunday dress and drinking their martinis or whatever, and it was a spectacle. It was like, oh, it's war. And again,
It was war, but it didn't know what was coming. Yeah.
all right, and it was pretty much, it was over very, very quickly. They surrendered, but what came after, they were not. Nobody was expecting that. And it's like same thing. It's like the number of people that I'm joining the army because I want to go to war. The people that think war is great. Well, once you get it, I'm not a veteran, so I can't speak to the actuality of war. But if you speak to veterans, veterans are not pro-war. It's non-veterans are pro-war for the most part.
Armchair generals like ourselves, I suppose.
Correct. And that's one of the reasons why in America for the longest time, if you had not served in the military, people did not want you as a president because people soldiers that have been in war know the horrors of war and are very, very careful with the thought of getting into a war, even a small one. I mean, Vietnam was supposed to be a military exercise. Just, this is going to be small, sort of like watching Fort Sumter. It's like, oh, well, we'll just go over there, we'll train up their people, the South Vietnamese, and so that they can withstand the North Vietnamese. And
Well, each civil war, we're talking about civil wars coincidentally, but each civil war has its own very specific rules.
Vietnam really was a civil war, and it had been going on for a while, and foreign countries kept coming in and involving themselves in that civil war. And just like in any civil war, it's a domestic fight, and that's like talk to a police officer about visiting a domestic situation. Like the husband and the wife are at full blows and maybe even pulling guns on each other, but you go in there as a police officer and, assuming the police officer is there trying to make sure bad things don't happen, a lot of times the police officer restrains the husband, who's typically stronger than the wife, and then he gets stabbed or shot in the back by the wife because he's attacking the husband. When you go into Vietnam or any civil war as the outsider and you start attacking one side, it's like, okay, well, that's my brother you're attacking.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden,
sometimes you didn't know who the enemy was. It's like the French in North Africa and in Algiers I think it was 1957. Funny thing you said about the people watching what was happening at Fort Sumter, April 1861. In 1936, in July and August, when the Spanish Civil War started in Madrid, so Madrid maintained itself as a Republican capital. The Republic was left-wing, and they had anarchists, communists, socialists, basically run by the trade unionists for the Republic side, and then against the military, the right-wing military, some fascists from the generals that had enough of the Republic. Anyway, they were Madrid was being attacked. Actually, it wasn't Madrid. It was here, Toledo. It was an encirclement. It was a nationalist stronghold, and the populace from Madrid would go there on Sundays, drive down or take taxi cabs. They would go there at lunchtime, fire a few shots, and go to Madrid, and they would be boasting in the coffee shops that they had been in the war and they were so happy.
Participation award.
Yeah, the international brigades, which were the people from all over the world. Americans, they had the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, Canada, England, Germany, Italians. The international brigades were those that were supporting the Republic, and they came from all over the world, and they fought on the Republican side. Now, Churchill had a contempt for those for those people because they had no military training, and they were international, some of them British, and he called them armed tourists, if you can imagine, because a lot of
war tourism.
War tourism, really? Is that a term? It became one.
Enough movies. Again, we romanticize war and we don't really understand it. And people are like, ooh, I want to be in a war, so I could understand. It's like, hey, I'm going to go across. There's a battle going on. I'm going to go over there and join in the battle, just like the guys in the taxi cabs going down to fire a few shots. That was tourism, war tourism as well. And then you have the other people that they believe in the cause. Perhaps it's like, well, I believe in this cause for this side, and they join that side. I mean, we see that in the Middle East where certain people go to join ISIS because they believed in that that ideology, and they go over there. They have no military training whatsoever, and they go over there to fight on the side of ISIS.
Yeah, that's been there forever. That approach to war, and of course, though they have a dedication to. So you have the people that are dedicated to the cause, and they're not good at war. You have people that are dedicated to the cause and they are trained for war, and then you have mercenaries who usually don't necessarily care anything about the cause, but are paid to fight, and they are professionals.
They care about the money.
So it's like I heard in that movie, Spy Game, with Robert Redford and Brad Pitt. They were in Beirut in, I think it was 1985 or something, and he says, this place is like Baskin Robbins, 31 flavors. There's something here for everybody. Anyway, to get back, why do I like war or people like war? There is certainly a lot of action involved, but we were saying that it's a catalyst for change. Abraham Lincoln used it, not on purpose, but he used it to advance the cause, the anti-slavery cause, to a great extent. It was early in the war that he had the Emancipation Proclamation. Was that 1863 or?
Well, that only covered the rebel states, the ones that had seceded. It did not affect the slaves in the slave states that stayed with the Union.
Yeah, the state.
So again, it was like you say, it's a catalyst for change. The catalyst on the South was they didn't like the president, so they basically,
well, they wanted to keep their way of life, which
so they
was
left
based
the
on the
Union,
slave economy.
And the war started because it started at Fort Sumter. It was like, okay, well, this is federal property in our area. We're going to take it over. So the catalyst of change started with, we're going to take the federal property, the U.S. federal property, for the Confederacy.
They were able to implement a change. They being the abolitionists and some of the Republicans implemented change that could have taken another 20 years, if not more, to do. In the Spanish Civil War, the country had always been a monarchy, and they had the Second Spanish Republic in 1931, and it was okay. I mean, there was a lot of illiteracy and poverty, but eventually the country could not hold itself together in the view of the conservatives. The country started breaking apart. In the north, you had the Basques that they wanted separatism. Catalonia, Barcelona, they wanted to become separate as well. They had their own. They have their own language today, and they started going after the church. The economy started suffering, and so the military had enough, and they said, "Let's put an end to this." And now, not only did they do a coup, which became a war because they didn't capture key cities quickly enough, but Franco might have delayed the taking of Madrid and delayed some. I mean, there was one point later in the war where they had cut the country in half, and he was going to eliminate this area here, Barcelona. I mean, if he eliminated that, the war would have been over. But instead of going west, instead of going east, he decided to go west towards Valencia, and his rationale for that was that there was a lot of oranges in Valencia, and it's a good economy for us.
Gotta have your vitamin C.
So basically, war makes things go quicker. That's a given. Now, personally speaking, and I mention movies because a lot of you are familiar with these movies. If you're history buffs, it's a point of reference for you. I never forget, and I think he might have said this in real life. I'm very careful to say this is what he said in the movie. Therefore, I usually read 2 or 3 books about that person or the topic. General Patton in the movie Patton, 1970, George C. Scott, great actor. He said he was looking at an armed column in Sicily, I think it was, and he said, "Look at this. Compared to war, all forms of human endeavor shrink to insignificance." That, you could see that 2 ways. It's very easy to say, "Oh, what an idiot," or he must have been a violent man. That's not the point there. The point was that he sees this armed column in these backward roads in Sicily in 1943, and everything is going according to plan. Everything is organized. the logistics of war, the sheer organization and logistics, it far outweighs any of the complications in combats. Just that alone, the administration, the politics, the propaganda. War is the highest, I say this very carefully and I'll explain. Please don't throw anything at me right now. War is the highest form of human achievement in the sense that the money goes first to war. I mean, you can run out of money for education, we know this. You can run out of money for, and this is a criticism, you can run out of money for building, but you never run out of money for war. Once again, Spanish Civil War, going back to that, the country didn't have enough money, but the Germans came in, the Italians came in, the British, the American companies, oil companies, banks, everybody, the French, even Mexico, everybody gave both sides money for the war. And as a matter of fact, check this out. Hermann Goering, the chief of the German Air Force, he ran a few companies himself. He was a capitalist, and he actually sold. So the Germans had the Condor Legion in Spain, 5,000 ground troops and aircraft, especially aircraft, and so they're fighting there, and they're supporting the nationalists, Franco. But Goering was secretly also selling weapons to the Republicans indirectly. But he knew exactly what was going on. That's how crazy it is. So anyway, so there's enough money for war and the scientific achievements first. We see all those movies. Once again, movies. We see the spy movies. Everything is like top dollar, top technology. Science goes there first. Research.
It's the urgency.
Research and development.
It's the urgency. When there are dire circumstances, you will find that humans excel. So we're in lockdown and whatnot because of COVID, and look what happened. At least, they got a vaccine in 9 months. Now you can question whether it's effective or safe and things like that because
I ain't touching that with a 10-foot pole.
Tested per se, but that was something that was done in 9 months. The United States basically gave, it's basically a pre-sale, but gave $2 billion to a number of different companies in order to rush the vaccine, to get something out there. And I'm sure there's, being a little bit U.S. centric and whatnot, I'm sure there's other countries that did so as well. I'm sure Britain and Germany also did things where they gave money to the companies as prepaying for the vaccine. And we have a vaccine rolling out. This is mid-February in 2021. A year ago, this was something that was a rumor over in Wuhan. It wasn't a big deal to us. You had all the politicians saying, oh, it's not a big deal, not a big deal, doing the typical run around and, come down,
so you're saying it's a crisis.
Have a party and whatever. Well, it became a crisis. So anytime humanity gets into a crisis, humanity, the ingenuity and the human mind, what it can accomplish is phenomenal. And when you get everybody on the same page going after something, you get all kinds of great inventions. Well, when you get into war, depending on the size of the war, your very existence again is at stake. Each side will go and become much more focused on whatever that is.
And during the short span of the war, whatever that is, more research and development is sped up, and a lot of they make huge inroads into all sorts of.
If you look at World War II, the beginning,
they still had biplanes.
They had biplanes, and they were.
Some nations had
Poland. They were carpet bombing, and then by the end, you had nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
World War II was the first nuclear war. Hopefully it's the last. Now, you look at to go from biplanes to, some of the various different fighters and bombers that were developed during World War II, and then you look at the technology of looking at primarily the United States, because their arms are so far advanced, they're not that much different, in the last 50 years. They're still using the F-15, and if you look at, it's been relative peace. There haven't been massive upgrades in technology and the likes of what happened in, say, 5 years of, from 40 to 45.
And I mean, going into now the form that war is conducted, that's something that we'll talk about on another session. Now they have a much more even humane in a lot of area, in one sense, a more humane approach to war, because they're more surgical in the damage that they do. But that's for another time. The human endeavors are greater in war. Doesn't mean that it's for a good cause. It's for a good cause in the sense that the country's in the crisis. But that's, if so much energy, so much ingenuity, so much dedication, so much sometimes passion goes into something like war, how can we not be attracted by it, right? It's natural for us to be attracted by it. And once again, like you pointed out, being in the war would, I know about soldiers that have been in wars, veterans, and one of the things, this supports my argument, if you want to call it that. I was under the impression that most soldiers that were in war, they don't care about war. They don't want to talk about war. That's true in some cases, but in my personal experience, and once again, this is just an opinion, it's an experience, you can't go against that. Soldiers that I have talked to, or people that had parents as soldiers, they don't have an aversion to war necessarily, in the sense that they think it's a horrible thing, and you can speak for that.
They have an aversion for useless war. So
your father was a veteran in
Vietnam, and so at some other time maybe we'll discuss that.
Yeah, we'll tell that story.
So speaking primarily to my father, he was after being drafted into the Vietnam War afterwards, and especially with myself and my brother, he became a bit of a war prepper. He prepped my brother and I in case we were drafted into war. He didn't join the army. He didn't want to be a part of the army per se. He was drafted. He did very well, and
he didn't want to make a career out of it. Yeah.
Sometimes you get into a smaller war to avoid a larger war. And that's where you get into a great philosophical debate, in that should you get into a small war to avoid a possible larger war? People avoided confronting Germany in the 30s when he was invading various countries, because they did not want to have a war with Germany.
And Hitler counted on that, because he was very ruthless that way.
And we ended up in basically World War II, which resulted in millions of people dead. Fast forward to, the Gulf War, or the Iraq War. So Saddam invaded Kuwait. The world kicked him out of Kuwait, but he still had visions of invading Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and whatnot, and eventually, regime change, and that was the reason for, the Iraq War, the continuation of the 1991 invasion, because people said he had weapons of mass destruction, and the question is, do you have a small war now to prevent Saddam from being the next Hitler. Well, that's
You can argue, and I remember because I was a teenager at the time, that that would have been the use, the cynical use of that angle from the from the U.S. government at the time, from George H.W. Bush, that we have to stop. We have to stop. They're going to use that as an excuse to go to war. Remember what happened with just like Hitler used. Oh, war is very bad, guys. You don't want to have another war, so just give me everything I want.
Yep.
And they could have used. Remember how bad Hitler was. We need to.
And that's,
it works both ways. I'm not saying one way or the other. What
well, that's
happened?
the philosophical.
I just like to bring it up.
Like, how many times have you heard the comment, if you could go back and kill baby Hitler, would you do it?
You become his friend. You wouldn't
Right.
kill him. You become his
So-
friend. Give him a childhood. Let him grow up normally.
Maybe, but that's the thing. It's like, do you do a small war now, or do you wait and let the bigger war happen? I don't.
It's not.
I don't have an answer to that.
I don't care about answering that. What I care is our goal here today was to, as a sort of an apologetic, why people like war or they're attracted to it. Not like war, but they respect war. And I certainly do not want to. I don't want to just everything that's war is bad. Let's put it aside. If you put it aside, it's not a good idea. We not study diseases. I have business groups that I attend, networking, and I mentioned this, and I noticed that there is this. Why are you doing a board game about war? Now, within the people that like strategy games, it's not a big deal. Obviously, this is what we do. But outside of that, people are not really aware of how big how many fans there are of strategic games, right?
That not just that, but Civil War. Why pick Civil War? Civil War tends to be fairly brutal. For example, with I'm being American, I know the U.S. Civil War better. Only the very wealthy, like the 1%ers in the South, had slaves. Right? Your big plantation owners. You didn't have a slave if you were upper middle class.
Yeah.
The war was primarily about slavery, and one of the issues, again, with most wars, at least in the history of war, it's really the elites who choose war. So it was the elites of the South, the politicians of the South, that decided to secede. The people kind of just went with it, and to some
As they
degree,
always do.
People get whipped up into a frenzy, and they listen to the propaganda and whatever, and they listen to their CNN of the time and whatever, and the North is bad, and they're trying to take away our way of life. And they'll use platitudes like that. It's like, well, what way of life were they really talking about? It's like, okay, well, yeah, maybe my business was tied to a plantation that made tobacco. Maybe I was a tobacco drying company, and if you damage the plantation, then my way of life is affected, and I'm turning a blind eye to the slavery. But for the most part, was I in favor of slavery itself? I didn't have a slave. If you turned the slaves free and they had to, be paid, how big of a deal would that have been? How much were they paying to buy a human being versus if they were to pay them? So it's usually just, war is about the elites. You go back, go to, again, we brought up the Iraq War. It was really the President of the United States wanted to get rid of the president,
And the Iraqi people. It wasn't the Iraqi people. It was the Ba'ath Party and.
Yeah, it was the leaders. It's like Saddam wanted to be whatever he wanted. The people didn't want that war. You had Iraqi Americans. There's one story, the one guy that was in a foxhole when the Americans rolled up, and his response is in perfect English, "Thank God you guys are here." He was visiting family back in the old country when everything went down, and he was conscripted into the Iraqi army, made to fight against his own countrymen. Now, World War II, same type of deal. Most of the people didn't want that. World War I was straight up basically a family squabble. War has drastically changed in that it's no longer necessarily, modern warfare is not necessarily the people, the little guys versus the little guys. It's now at least for example, Soleimani, basically he was targeted and struck by the United States. So it's the elites are now going after the elites rather than putting the little guys out there.
Or these huge armies, right? So, well, the point is, war exists. It's not to be ignored, and as long as it's of such great prevalence and continues to be, it's just as good as any other reality to use through board games or the study of war or the pursuit of the study of war through history and to reenact it, not reenactors, but reenact it through something as simple as a board game. But that will be our next topic. What is so special about board games, war board games? Why war board games and not other types? Why are they sort of timeless and they keep? I mean, there's like 100 games on the American Civil War. There's probably 2,000 on World War II. Why are they so timeless? Why are they arguably even better than chess itself? We'll talk about that next time. Thank you, David. And since you didn't drink your water, I shall do it for you. You did, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Okay. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.